We are less than a week away from the start of a new Texas legislative session, from property taxes to the border to a billion dollar surplus. A lot to talk about with the editor of the Quorum Report, Scott Braddock, who is out of Austin, knows all things Austin politics. So, Scott, thanks for sharing some time with us.
Myra, don't hold me to that. I know everything. Come on, hey, look.
I was going to say, you're not limited to just Austin. I mean,
Right. We do move around the state, but I was going to say Happy New Year to y'all. If 2022 was not for you, in 2023, we'll see. I'm trying to be optimistic.
Yeah, I like that. We'll see. We'll see what happens. And that's what we're looking forward to next Tuesday when we kick off this legislative session. You know, we've seen sessions in the past where there seems to be one issue that takes all the focus, really dominates the session. Do you think that it's shaping up to be something similar this time around?
It may be. And, when a married couple fights about money, it's never that there's too much of it. But at the Capitol, it's going to be the opposite. Like you said, there's going to be so much money in the bank that there will be big arguments about what to do with it exactly. What has been said about that? Well, the governor and the lieutenant governor have said that they would basically like to take about half of this record surplus that we're expected to see, which is going to if you add everything together between general revenue and what's in the state savings account, that's the Economic Stabilization Fund, sometimes called the Rainy Day Fund, it's approaching 45 or 50 billion with a B dollars.
Wow.
And so what to do with that? The governor and lieutenant governor have said, hey, they want to spend at least about half of it on property tax relief. Now, there are some complications with that because it's a little arcane, but the state has a constitutional spending limit, and so they'll have to figure out how to navigate that. But there's not a whole lot of meat on the bone as far as any real proposal to get that done so far. So we'll all be tuned in to see exactly what's going to happen. As far as what happens on Tuesday, pomp and circumstance, it's like, the first day of school, all these folks who haven't seen each other for almost 2 years, and some people who are freshmen who have never been seen before at the Capitol. People will be, getting together, socializing, and very different from 2021 when it was the COVID session, if you will, when there wasn't as much of that. And a lot of the members didn't really get a chance to know each other as much as they will get to this time around, because we'll kind of go back to normal without the social distancing, the masks, and all of that.
Yeah, not nearly the drama that we've been seeing in the nation's capital either over the last few days.
Right.
You talked about no concrete proposals right now, but I mean, there are a lot of people who are at home that's like, I would love property tax relief. I mean, however it comes. I mean, are we talking about something as drastic as cutting a check to taxpayers, to homeowners right now?
It's interesting, Steve. They've talked about that before, but in the 2021 session, there was a proposal to send people $500 checks as sort of a rebate for their property taxes. But because the state doesn't collect property taxes, that's a local thing. It was discovered through the process that if they sent checks to people, that in and of itself would be taxable income. And so that becomes less attractive because of that. There are several things they could do. They could once again raise the homestead exemption, which is a constitutional amendment, which means that 2/3 of the House and Senate would have to sign off on that. So whatever they would come up with on that would have to have the support of not just Republicans in the majority, but also the Democrats in the minority. By the way, that kind of consensus building that's necessary is one of the reasons you won't see the kind of drama that we're seeing in the Capitol in Washington. You won't see the same kind of speaker fight. And look, there are other things they can do. One of the most consequential things that they can do, and you'll remember this, in 2019, the legislature rewrote some of the way that schools are paid for. And they basically, so lawmakers at that time did a lot of work to set us up for what we have now, which is a lot of extra money. And what they would do with that to contain property taxes at the local level, because as you know, the biggest line in your property tax bill is that school district tax for your local ISD. And what they would do is flow billions of dollars through the school funding formulas. And there are probably 5 people on the entire planet who fully understand the school finance system in Texas. I'm not one of them, but I do know this. That when that was done in 2019, about $3 billion was spent to compress taxes locally, basically offering some kind of relief because of the growth in appraisals and because of the growth of Texas as a state. Remember, we still have about 1,000 people moving here every single day. Because of that growth, the cost of offering that same kind of relief to taxpayers will be about $6 to $7 billion, something like that. So that starts to eat into that surplus we're talking about just by doing that.
Let's talk about another topic that we brought up with you last time you were here, the idea of legalized gambling in Texas, or at least in some aspects. Has that gained any momentum since we last spoke?
If anything, it's going in the other direction. You may have seen that Lieutenant Governor Patrick, who of course presides over the Texas Senate, and the way the Senate works, one of the ways that it works is that the Lieutenant Governor is kind of like the teacher at the front of the classroom. The senators have to have their hand raised, and they get, they're called on by him to bring up different proposals. He sounds very, he almost sounds against it. He doesn't sound fully against it, but he has said that there's no movement forward on that. And he said that in a recent interview. And so he's kind of throwing cold water on it. So I'm not sure that there's any real momentum for that. I do. And that's on casino gambling specifically, where he was asked about that. On sports betting, which I think we talked about previously on KSAT, there is maybe a chance that the Lieutenant Governor might be open to having some sort of retail location for sports betting, but apparently, this is according to my reporting, he's not in favor of people being able to do it on their phones. He doesn't want it to be online, which, of course, as you know, for the sports betting companies like DraftKings and Barstool Sports and others, they want folks to be able to do it on their phone online. So that's a point of contention. Yeah,
a lot to watch there. Do you expect any of the drama between the House and the Senate that we've seen in legislatures past?
Oh, yes, that's where it really happens, Steve. Because we have a Republican majority and have for so long now, for a generation, it's not so much Democrats and Republicans fighting with each other, even though that does happen. But most of the fights at the Capitol end up being the Senate versus the House. And as former Speaker Strauss from San Antonio used to say, if the House and Senate don't agree to do a certain thing, well, then that thing just doesn't happen. So you, again, have to come back to consensus building and putting together a governing coalition when it comes to any of these big proposals we're talking about, if you want them to become Texas law.
Scott Braddock with the Quorum Report, who knows all things Texas politics. How dare I say just Austin, the whole state you're keeping tabs on. So thanks for being here this evening.
Myra, thank you. Good to see you all, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button. And if you want to get notifications on new videos about restaurants from across the Lone Star State, make sure to hit that subscribe button.